So following me home today is a turntable that'll look familiar if you've seen one of my other videos. This is a Sony PS-T2. And if you watch my other video, you'll know that I was not particularly a fan of that fully automatic turntable. So the T2 is one model below the T3, and it is a semi-automatic that is an automatic lift at the end of the record. So fingers crossed, a little bit less complex. So the seller stated that it runs, but the speed control is a bit wobbly and it doesn't sound particularly good with this cartridge on it. But I bought it because it was A, cheap, and B, included a lot of parts, including that head shell and cartridge and a lid. So I already like this turntable better than the other one because I can tell it's less complex because you just move the tone arm over to start it up like you do with a lot of other similar turntables, and it shuts off when you move it back. But there's a point of resistance here. It doesn't seem to want to go past here. So the seller stated that the speed was off. So let's do a speed test here. So at 33, it is adjustable here, although it seems the range of adjustment here won't get me all the way to 33 1/3. So there is an adjustment underneath that we can do. So the platter mat is dirty but in good condition. And the platter pulls off. This looks like it's in good shape too. This has that tape head speed sensor like the other one, and the platter with the magnetic stripe on the inside to help to control the speed. It's a little bit lighter platter than the other Sony. So I could tell it was quite a bit lighter than the other Sony, and if you flip it over, you'll see why. It has this fiberboard base instead of a plastic one, and less fancy rubber feet, but I know the drill to remove the screws around the perimeter to get this off. So underneath, we can see that it is very similar, but obviously much simpler than the fully automatic Sony that I worked on before. Seems to be exactly the same plinth with the same parts, just not drilled out for the features it doesn't have. So if I move the tone arm, I can feel there's quite a bit of resistance to it as it moves across its path. So cleaning all of these bits here, I think will resolve that. So to clean the mechanism, I'm going to remove this part right here with this screw. It's a big long screw. And remove this ground lug. Okay, so this pin that goes into the white gear on the top is pretty crummy. This is kind of gummy right here, and also between these two metal parts where they slide, there's a lot of resistance. So I'm not going to take apart anything that I don't have to, but I'm going to use some WD-40 as a solvent, which works well to break down this old grease, and it won't hurt anything. It's not a permanent lubricant, but it'll get things freed up. I'm going to service the motor to make sure it's working the best it can be before I mess with the speed, and that's just a matter of taking out these 4 screws. And that just lifts out. So having gently turned it over, trying not to put too much stress on the wires, I'm going to pull this off. All right, it came off pretty easily. So I'm going to clean up the shaft as well as the hole with some first dry Q-tips and then Q-tips and isopropyl alcohol. So that actually was not nasty at all. It was actually quite clean, easy to get even cleaner. So I'm going to put it back together now. So there was no ball bearing in the bottom of the recess here, but there is a captive one on the bottom of the shaft, and this is also in good condition, so it's not going anywhere, so I'm not going to mess with it. So I'm going to re-lubricate this with the 3-in-1 motor oil and put it back together. So while I'm under here, I'm going to clean the speed control potentiometers just to make sure there's no issue with them. So to do that, I need to remove this adjusting foot to get access to the circuit board, which is down here. So there's some Phillips or JIS screws here. So here we are. So I'm going to spray some deoxit in here and work these back and forth to get as much corrosion and gunk out of there as possible. So there's a lot of variable resistors on this board, and since I don't yet have a service manual for this turntable, I don't want to start messing with them if I don't know what they do. But fortunately, if we put the base back on, we can see that there is a speed control hole that lines up perfectly with just one of those variable resistors, and that one happens to be this upper one right here. All right, now I'm going to check the speed again. So first I'm going to center these controls so that I have a range of motion once everything's put back together and that variable resistor on the bottom is adjusted correctly. So I'm going to turn it. It's about a quarter turn, half a turn, 3/4 of a turn. It's about 3/4 of a turn. So I'm going to do 1/4 and then about 1/8. Do the same with the other one. So having allowed ample time for the deoxit on those controls to dry out, I'm going to try the speed again. Now, of course, I could just be using the built-in strobe on here. So even with the cleaned motor and the cleaned and centered controls, it's still a little low on 33. Okay, so I've got it running, and I have a screwdriver underneath in the correct variable resistor. So I'm going to turn it a little bit. So again, I have the speed controls on top centered. Just little by little. That's pretty good on 33. Since there is only one speed control, hopefully that will set it for 45 also. And 45 is still a little bit high, but I think I can live with that. So the Tonearm seems to move pretty freely from side to side now, so that's an improvement. So I'm going to clean the underside of this gear. Now I know this is a failure point on these turntables because this is what stripped out on the other turntables, so I'm going to be very careful removing this to get to the underside. So that has come apart without incident. So there's a little bush in here that I should clean up, and I'm going to clean out all of this grease and then re-grease it with some clean grease. So that seems to be working smoothly. I'm going to put the powder back on. So I used the cartridge and head shell from the other Sony turntable, so it's already aligned properly. I balanced it correctly, and it plays, and it actually sounds pretty good. But I did notice a problem. So, if you look at this, that head shell really should be parallel to the surface of the record. As you can see, it is tilted quite a bit down to the right toward the outside of the record. So I found the problem, and it's not something I wanted to see. So if you see, the tone arm is wiggling in the mount here. So enough, it will rotate enough to get that cartridge parallel, but it won't stay that way. So I need to figure out if this is something that can be fixed. So unfortunately, I figured out what the problem is, and the problem is that the tone arm carrier is cracked. So we're looking here at the underside of it, and you can see there's a little gap there that isn't supposed to be there. So it runs up from the bottom and then around up to here. So this is not good news. And actually, I looked at the other Sony turntable that's like this and noticed a similar crack. So this is probably a weakness of these turntables. So unfortunately, I think my only option is to glue it with super glue. So there's a small recess down here at the bottom, and I think I can drip glue in there. But then I need to keep the tone arm in the right position as the glue dries so that it is level when I'm all said and done. So not up like this, but down like that. Okay, so I've cleaned it up as much as I can to give the glue a good chance of sticking. So I'm going to do this off camera so I make sure that I do it correctly. I'm going to try to spread the crack down here a little bit with a screwdriver so I can get the super glue into the crack. And I'm going to be using a liquid super glue rather than a gel, so it will drip into the crack. Also going to put super glue around the perimeter here, particularly there's a little notch under here. So I have a zip tie loosely put around the tone arm for right now. So once the glue is on there, I'm going to put this on there and zip it down, add like a clamp to hold that together. And also to make sure that this is in position, I'm going to attach a weight, or actually a clamp, to the side to hold this down so that's in the correct position for the glue to harden. Wish me luck. Okay, so I let the super glue cure for about 18 hours, so let's see how this worked. That is a big improvement. I'm not going to try to break it, but it feels solid. And looking at how the stylus and the cartridge sit on the record, that looks pretty level to me. That is a huge improvement. So hopefully this will have fixed this problem, which seems to be common on, well, my sample size of 2 Sony turntables. So I'm pretty pleased with that. So with my mechanical issues hopefully sorted out, I was able to give it a nice cleanup and everything came out very well. So one thing that does need attention though is the damping of the tone arm. So it is going down too quickly, as you can see here. And this is a common problem that's easily addressed. So what I need to do is apply silicone damping fluid. This is 300,000 CST to the shaft here, and then work it up and down. And with gravity's help, that will drip in there and fix that damping problem. So the lid of this turntable is in good shape overall. It is kind of cloudy, although there are some weird places. You can see where it's actually more clear. Maybe something was sitting on top of this for a while. I did try to polish it up, but it didn't seem to help that much. And once again, it was missing its hinges. But these are commonly available hinges that are used by different brands, including Sony, JVC, Kenwood, and others. So I've ordered yet another set of those. I'll leave a link to these in the description, and that should fix that right up. So I've been testing it with a different one, but the turntable came with this very nice Pioneer head shell with a cartridge, although I decided to swap it out for a different one for this vintage appropriate ADC cartridge with a brand new elliptical stylus. So this will sound great. So this head shell, although it's not made by Sony, is appropriate for this turntable because Sony has a different alignment scheme to Techniques. So this is a standard Techniques cartridge, and if we line up the back flanges of them, you can see that the two slots in the Pioneer / Sony Headshell extend further back than they do in the Techniques. And depends on the cartridge, but that's often necessary to get it aligned properly, because the Techniques standard is that there should be 52 millimeters between this flange and the tip of the stylus. The Sony standard is 49 millimeters. So you have to push the cartridge further back in the head shell and therefore in those slots to get it aligned correctly. So it's aligned now, but based on where it ended up, I think a standard Techniques head shell would have worked fine for this. But again, if you want to make a change in the future, it's always better to have the optimal head shell on the turntable. So after my previous experience with a Sony turntable, I questioned my sanity in purchasing another one to work on, but I'm glad that I did. So this is a PS-T2, the little brother to the PS-T3, and this has a semi-automatic mechanism which was significantly less complex to work on and clean up. So the speed control turned out to be not a problem. Did have that scare with the Tonearm, but I think that's been fixed okay. So I'm pleased with how this turntable turned out. It looks great, and I think will be a fun listening partner for years to come.